East War of June of 1967 caused major changes to the maps, the people, and the governments in the Middle East. The early morning of June 5th exploded with the surprise attack of the Israeli Air Force on the Egyptian airplanes on the ground. 80% of the Egyptian Air Force was destroyed. By June 7th, Israel had destroyed the air forces of Egypt, Syria, and Jordan. They had control of the Sinai Peninsula, Jerusalem, the West Bank, and Gaza. On June 8th, the USS Liberty, America's most sophisticated intelligence ship in 1967, was attacked by Israeli air and naval forces in international waters, 13 miles off of El Arish in Sinai. 34 Americans were killed. 172 were wounded. The Israeli and American governments pronounced the attack as a case of mistaken identity. Issi Rehar was the chief of Israeli naval operations. He reported a ship had shelled the port city of El Arish.
So I think around 12 o'clock, I decided to order 3 MTBs, motor torpedo boats, from the port of Ashdod.
Are you sure you can't see any kind of an identification? And all the words came back, no.
If you will be sure that it is a military ship, you can hit it.
The first Mirage pilot radioed, "Oil is spilling out into the water." Another added, "Great, wonderful, she's burning, she's burning." And El Arish commander reported, "He's hit her a lot, there's an oil slick in the water." Then headquarters asked, "Menachem, is he screwing her?" The next wave was super mysteres with 1,000-pound bombs and canisters of jellied gasoline. Someone in Southern Command called, "He's going down low with napalm all the time." The flight leader noted, "It would be a blessing if we could have iron bombs. Otherwise, our Navy's going to get here and do the sinking." A pilot interrupted, "Pay attention. The ship's markings are Charlie, Tango, Romeo 5. There's no flag on her." And headquarters ordered, "Leave her."
The time now is 14:12, and he says, "I see CTR-5." And the minute we hear that, the Air Force stops all operations and says, "All our aircraft, all our attack aircraft, please stop." I must say that at that point in time, in my mind, it was an American ship.
But that opinion was not shared by the commander of the torpedo boat squadron. He believed it to be a small Egyptian freighter, the El Qasir.
We told him there are some doubts about identification.
These doubts, incredibly, did not reach the commanding officer who ordered the torpedoes launched.
That the order did not reach the commanding officer on the bridge where you launched the torpedoes.
At about a range of 1,000 yards, or a little bit more than 1,000 yards, I ordered to prepare the torpedoes and ordered that all commanders will take the action of firing torpedoes.
This is the story of the attack on the Liberty, told by Israeli and U.S. government sources. Now, we are going to show you what really happened. The survivors of the 294-man crew of the USS Liberty will tell you their story.
I'm Tito Howard, the producer of The Loss of Liberty. The host for this program about the attack on the USS Liberty will be Dr. Richard Kiefer, one of the many heroes that day. Dr. Kiefer was the only doctor aboard Liberty. He had a gunshot wound, he had a burn, he had a broken right kneecap, and he had 11 pieces of shrapnel in his abdomen, which he kept together with a life jacket. That man stood on those legs for 28 consecutive hours, saving American lives and limbs.
This film should shock decent Americans. Above all, men and women who served in America's armed forces. It will shock particularly as it was an attack not by terrorists implacably opposed to the United States, as is the case of the USS Cole.
The Liberty is the most decorated ship in the history of the United States Navy. 840 medals, including the Medal of Honor for her skipper, the Presidential Unit Citation for her crew, 2 Navy Crosses, 11 silver stars, and 204 Purple Hearts.
The day before, I was topside when Israeli planes came by, and very close where we could wave to the pilots, and they were that close where we could wave back.
It was a very clear day. It was a warm day. Sunshine was shining brightly out. Nice breeze blowing, and I distinctly remember hearing the flag flapping in the wind.
There was approximately 13 sorties of our ship from 6 o'clock till 12 o'clock in the afternoon. We had a general quarters drill that lasted 45 minutes or so.
Our captain, like me being an engineer, really believed in watertight integrity and making sure our people were equipped and knew how to fight fires and repair damage.
I was coming to go back to the truss area, and I stepped out on deck. That plane came by and looked right in the cockpit. He waved, I waved. That's how close they were, and they knew where we were.
Well, all the recon flights that they had that morning, looking at our ship for approximately 67 hours, they had a good idea of what they were doing, and they hit us hard and fast with everything they had.
Commander William McGonigal, the ship's captain, although he had been badly wounded, most of his bridge crew had been killed. He stayed on the bridge throughout the attack and the long night that followed. Admired and respected by his crew, he received the Congressional Medal of Honor for gallantry.
When the plane struck, it was without provocation and certainly unexpected. And they seemed to descend on us from all directions at the same time. Those rockets and machine guns tore the ship. It killed men on deck. And we were defenseless. I heard this big bang, and there was bullet holes all behind in the cushions of the couch that I just left. And by the time I got to the door of the wardroom, the skipper was on the PA system that we were under attack by unknown forces, man your battle stations. Then the regular general quarters sound alarm went off, and right across the hatch from the wardroom is where I would go through, down through decks to my station. When I went through there was one rocket that came through and helped me to get down 2 floors in a dead-burn hurry. When I got up off my knees down there, we were well under attack. And the skipper again was on the phone system telling auxiliary radio to get word out to anyone that they could that we were under attack by unknown forces and we were in need of help.
My reporter station was radio central. It was my responsibility to keep up, ship to ship or ship to shore communications. And out on deck in radio central, we were taking rounds through the bulkheads. There was 2 55-gallon drums of gasoline just outside the bulkhead on the 01 level that had caught fire from the strafing run, and that was heating that outside bulkhead and peeling the paint off on the inside. There was a lot of smoke in the compartment. There was holes where we were taking rounds where the sunlight shining through, and it was a real surrealistic look.
I was topside, fighting fires and doing other damage control work throughout the duration of the attack. At the same time, I was able to observe the jets flying overhead, and I also observed the American flag flying from the mast. At no time did that flag hang limp from the mast.
I was one of the 2 signalmen on the USS Liberty when the ship was attacked, and my only job during the attack was to make sure that the flag was flying, so every few minutes I would walk out at the signal bridge up at the mast.
And fighting what fire we could with what little water I could give the people topside for the fire, it was really a problem.
So that on the first pass, they knocked out our ability to call for help. The one remaining antenna, which I had shut down because it had some problems in the tuner, is probably why it didn't get hit. I had to jury rig a coaxial cable directly from the transmitter to the antenna.
So we were working feverishly to try to get a signal out at that time, and then finally there was, we were able to get a signal to the 6th Fleet, and then I was listening or monitoring that communications, and they said that they would be sending aircraft, and so at that point, we just felt overjoyed that knowing that there was going to be aircraft coming to our rescue.
The initial strike by the planes on the ship commenced at about 5 minutes after 2 in the afternoon of 8 June. And the attack lasted about 20 minutes. The ship was fired at from port to starboard, starboard to port, stem to stern, and there was not a single compartment above the waterline that did not have one or more direct penetration by a rocket, machine gun, and they also dropped napalm on the bridge of the ship.
At 2:35 p.m., Defense Secretary Robert McNamara recalled the 12 Navy fighters that had been sent to our defense by the carrier Saratoga. At that time, no one aboard the Liberty had identified the attacking Israelis. It was 1.5 hours later that our embassy in Israel first told Washington that Israelis had attacked a ship, possibly a U.S. Navy ship. How then did McNamara know to recall the help sent to defend the Liberty?
When the ship came under attack. Now hear this, General Quarters, this is no drill. The ship is under attack by unidentified aircraft. And there were pings. We heard a lot of pinging, which were bullets running across the deck, and then we heard explosions. We didn't know what was going on, but of course General Quarters had sounded, so we battened down the hatches, and we started doing what we were trained to do.
We were under attack. We could hear these shells hitting the ship. The whole ship would ring. It was like you were on the inside of a huge bell and someone beating on it with a sledgehammer.
The aircraft take pictures as they fire their guns. These are used for analysis of their tactics, and these are used for confirmation of the damage that they've done. These pictures have never been publicly presented.
Lieutenant Ennis was sitting on the deck, and there was blood coming out of his mouth, and his knee was damp. He had an injury in his knee, and there was blood coming out of it. Lieutenant Toth had got blown off, I think, the 04 level, but I come across him, and he was just peppered from head to toe with shrapnel. And I covered him up with a blanket.
My brother, he was sent to on the bridge of the ship to find out what was who the planes were, where they came from. They had no markings. That's against the Geneva Rules of War right there. He received a Silver Star for his efforts. He was cut down by the planes.
The captain, initially after the attack, sustaining shrapnel wounds in his knee, and somebody put a tourniquet around his leg, and I got coffee. I think about 5 cups of coffee went down the captain to keep him going. It was impressive because with all the blood loss and everything, he was going all night long.
A short time after the air attack had been completed, the 3 torpedo boats approached us from our starboard quarter at high speed and in an apparent torpedo launch attitude.
The 3 Israeli torpedo boats fired 6 torpedoes at the Liberty. Because of Captain McGonagall's handling of the ship, 5 missed. Intelligence base was destroyed. 25 American sailors died almost instantly.
This hole in the side was in excess of 40 feet in diameter. You could put your whole house in that hole. And we were right in the middle of it.
We couldn't believe what we saw. You couldn't walk around that part of the deck without stepping on a piece of someone. In fact, Phil Cherney and myself had found a shoe with a foot still in it.
I do remember the alarm for standby to abandon ship. Don't leave your station yet. They were preparing to, and then that was called off because apparently the life rafts had been shot up. So there, if you went in the water, you were on your own. The list on the ship was considerable. You could tell it looked like at first we were going to maybe roll over.
The lights went out and the ship rolled over, and I figured, well, it's the end.
The torpedo had hit the side of the ship. Of the room I just stepped out of, killed every man in my division that was in there. This fellow first class that I mentioned, he was on the phone at the time just outside the door. It took off the back of his head. It broke my lower left leg, both bones, collapsed my lung, broke ribs, fractured my skull, blew out my eardrums.
We took the guy down below, and I don't know how many runs I made up and down, carrying wounded.
And I saw all the bodies laying there on the tables where Dr. Kiefer had been working on, and I was told that he was in the officers' wardroom operating on more people.
34 were killed, another 172 were wounded. The care of these people was done by myself with the assistance of 2 corpsmen. The corpsmen did many things of minor surgery, and I just had so much to do, keeping people together, keeping their limbs attached to their body.
We were in international waters. It was a beautiful day. You couldn't mistake us, and our flag was flying, for crying out loud.
They were there to kill us, and it just didn't register. Here they were, Israeli people, and they were going to try to kill us. It was just a very, very appalling situation.
A strange quiet descended on the Liberty crew. After the explosion, the pounding of machine gun bullets slowed and stopped. Fires were put out. The stunned, angry, and exhausted crew caught their collective breath. Limping at 5 knots toward sanctuary several hundred miles to the north, they had somehow survived one of the most ferocious sustained attacks ever on an American ship. 34 were dead, 171 were wounded. All survivors had mental scars. There is not one single life raft. The wounded are treated. Sailors remember that they were promised help. They expected that help. That help, in the form of phantom jets from the USS Saratoga, was on its way. It never arrived. It would be the next morning, 17 hours after the attack began, before they would see an American face. Finally, the USS Davis, and later the USS Massey, came alongside the Liberty. Many of their sailors wept as they boarded the Liberty, saw open decks stained with American blood, and parts of American bodies on the deck. Helicopters from the USS America arrived several hours later to medevac the most seriously wounded Liberty sailors back to that carrier. The air attack by 2 squadrons of Israeli aircraft, French-built Mirage 3s and Super Mystères, 821 rocket and cannon holes were found in the Liberty. Canisters of napalm had torched the ship. After the ferocious air attack, Liberty was pounded by 3 Israeli torpedo boats. One of their 6 torpedoes struck the Liberty, left the gaping hole at the water line. There were thousands of holes from armor-piercing machine gun bullets. They sank life rafts, shot at firefighters and stretcher bearers, at the bridge, and into the engine room.
Dr. Kiefer and his pharmacist mate performed in heroic fashion, as did all of the crew.
About the same time, Israeli land and air forces attacked the Golan Heights in a well-planned and executed strike. The attack, the recall, the jamming, the pounding, the torpedoes. Somehow the Liberty survived. And almost immediately, the second part of the outrage, the cover-up by the Israeli and the American government, began.
I had to go to work at midnight, and I'm trying to sleep, and I'm just thinking about how we had been so shafted by our government, the Israeli government, told to shut up, no chance to talk to one another. And it angered me. It really, really angered me.
On the day of the attack, I tried to coordinate communications. The Israelis had taken out all of our transmitting antennas. My RMs, not knowing any better during the strafing runs, were stringing long wires so that we could get an SOS out. And thanks to them, the ones that survived, we did get an SOS out to the USS America. Without George Golden, the ship would have sunk. Had it sunk, I assume when debris washed ashore the next day, it would have been blamed on Egypt. There were many, many miracles that day. I shouldn't be here. After watertight integrity had been established and the hatch had been sealed, they reopened it as I floated by. And Bud Schnell, went down and pulled me out. I'm just supposed to be here.
Sorry, guys.
None of us should be alive.